Hello, thanks for joining me. I'm Dan Sigmund, Supervisor of District 10. That's the Town of Rubicon, Village of Neosho, with Part 3 of the 2026 proposed Dodge County budget. I want to first off thank you all for your calls to the supervisors. They seem to be accepting the idea that we do not want to borrow money this year to pay expenses. But they're saying it's got to come next year. I think that's what they're saying. They still don't understand what the real problem is here. We're going to get into that a little bit, but administration and some supervisors still do not want to take a look at the real problem in our budget. Why do we have to borrow money to balance the budget? So we have overestimated some of the revenues, and now we want to borrow some money to pay expenses, and now we have a balanced budget. Sounds good, right? Not quite. The administration and the finance director spent over an hour convincing the executive committee members on some points. The administrators come up with some plans to move money around. You know, you kind of rob from Peter and you pay Paul and you make this look better. And they have found a way to fix 2 more roads without changing too much this year, they say. But it's not very good long-term strategy. We need to have some debt tax levy to make us really strong in this county. You know, debt, that strengthens you. Well, they did not want to go away with the administrator's $2 million slush fund to hand out to cities and towns for economic development. Even though that typically goes into housing, housing is usually taking place within TIF districts, delayed taxing, you know, that kind of TIF districts. So we wouldn't see revenue, sales tax, not sales tax, but property tax revenue for 20 years or more, even on these projects that we're throwing our money at. Why would we want to give away money if we have to borrow it to balance the budget? That still doesn't make sense. And they say, oh, we're going to reap benefits down the road, down the road, down the road. You know how that goes. Down the road, we're going to be rich. They did not want to spend the $5 to $6 million that was discovered in the general fund unassigned. You know, if you watch Comer Pyle, all of a sudden you say, surprise, surprise. I might be dating myself there, but some of you know what I'm talking about. Well, all of a sudden the question was asked, how much is in there? Well, $10.5 million unassigned. Perfect. That's what we need for roads, right? Well, we have to keep 2 to 3 months in there by policy. In all the funds in the county, there's always a 2 to 3 month amount you have to keep in so you don't run yourself down to nothing. So we always have 3 months of operating expenses to cover if we have any kind of problems. But that still leaves $5 or $6 million, but they don't want to spend it. Because if you spend that savings account, then it doesn't look as good to the people who want to borrow you money, and you don't get quite as good an interest rate. So now we are managing our county according to what auditors and the bond people want us to do. You know, when it comes to municipalities, there is different rules than personal finances, but boy, I shouldn't think we want to just throw all the personal rules for personal finances out the window and just take on debt to strengthen ourselves. Now, the third thing they did not want to use, they did not want to remove the second COLA, cost of living adjustment for employees. There's 2 of them, remember? The first one was 2.64%, which I think is pretty nice, you know, pretty generous, considering we are running short on funds, right? But then in July, that comes in January, but in July there's another 2.5%, but only for the employees who have been here 5 years or longer. There was a step increase policy that was a bad policy. It wasn't working right. So they sort of discarded it, but they kept this COLA that was always in that step increase in place, which gave those employees an extra, well, this year 2.5%. And you know, the more you make, the higher the percentages. So those who make the most get the most increase, even though it doesn't cost them any more to live. So cost of living adjustment really is a misnomer for that. But instead they just moved the money around just so they could hang on to that money. That would have been so easy to make the problem, solve it a lot easier. Let's see, what else do I want to tell you here? So we have 1A. COLA increases. I explained there's two of them. Why the first one? For everybody, because there's a cost of living adjustment. Why the second one? Because of that policy that was bad. What was that second cost of living increase based upon? This 2.5%? It wasn't based on merit. It was not based on job performance. It was not based on continuing education. It wasn't based on anything. It was just, here you go. Thanks for being here another year. Is that good money sense? There was an abuse of things, no doubt, but most supervisors and the administration, they just clung to it. It was just a gift to them. Now, here's quotes from some of the supervisors on the executive committee, and you can watch this video, it's recorded. When it came to talking about not applying the second COLA, 2.5% to those employees, they said, well, our county, Dodge County, is viewed as a negative place to work, and they want to change that. Well, I don't really think that's true. It might be a perception for some people, but there's a lot of people that work there that are making pretty good money, and I'll show you why a little bit here. Another quote, cutting this second COLA would send a message that we don't appreciate our employees. In other words, if we appreciate our employees, we should overpay them, right? Well, some people don't think we're overpaying them, but doesn't that first cost of living adjustment mean anything? It's totally forgotten. If we don't give a second one, then we don't care. Dodge County government has become fat. And not just a little fat, not just a medium fat. I say we've become really fat the last 10 years. And I state that, and it was feeding from federal and state grants, especially the COVID grants. They were just, the federal government was just throwing money into the state, and the state was throwing money into counties, and the counties were just lapping it up. Just like a cancer cell laps up all your energy, right? But just think of this. $100 million was the budget around 10 years ago. We have nearly doubled that. How can that be? Our population hasn't doubled. Our services haven't doubled. Inflation hasn't doubled, last I heard. So citizens are pretty much aging in our county, slowly. The county hasn't built a lot more buildings, and it's not providing new services. So why do we have this double in the budget? On top of that, we have nearly 50% more employees than we did back then too. You see how I mean? This is ballooned out of proportion, and that's why we can't balance our budget. Everybody's trying to keep their hands off of those employees who are getting, many of them, overpaid without giving any reason to pay them more than they are getting. So now the state and federal money is drying up. No more COVID money? Well, what are we going to do? We have to fund all this. Our wages and benefits take over 50% of the property tax levy right now. And it's going up every year. It's an extra $2.5 million this year. How do you get that down? When you keep and maintain the same number of employees and you keep giving them a cost of living adjustment, and health insurance is costing 12 to 15% more each year right now. Well, they promise it'll only go up maybe 9% next year. That's all additional expenses for all these employees that many we probably don't need. But if you say, let's just cut back 2 to 5% of our employees, you think the sky is falling. But that's why we can't balance the budget. And there is some abuse too. we have to get supervisors to consider this as the only answer. And I remember 2 years ago, one of our supervisors, who is now the vice chairman, made a big to-do saying, hey, in 2 years, this is really going to be a problem. We cannot sustain this kind of wage cycle. He stopped talking about it, but it has come to fruition, but they still don't want to deal with it. We need some new people on the county board to look at this, and that's why I'm talking to you right now. Find people, whether it's you or someone you know, to run for the county board. For in 2026, you have to have your name in by the end of December this year. We can use help. Now, we talked about the labor being over 50%. Why is it that so many supervisors don't want to touch that? A good portion have been on the public dole, working for the public sector, sometimes in their whole life. They don't understand what it's like to be in the private sector. Whether you're an employee or whether you're the owner of your own business, they've never done that. And that's something we need more understanding of, the private sector common sense. So I want you to consider running. Consider running in 2026. Now, here's an example of the allowed abuse of our taxpayer money for wages. In 2020, right before I came to Dodge County and became active in Dodge County government, they did a study called the McGrath study. And the supervisor reminded me of this when I watched the executive committee meeting, this past one. It was a wage study that cost the county $85,000 to figure out wages, you know? And here's a quote that they gave Dodge County 5 years ago. Because the county offers a much more generous calculation of overtime than is legally required, did you catch that? It says much more generous than is legally required. And we don't care about our employees, right? It goes on. Because of that, employees are earning overtime when it is not required by federal law, costing this county hundreds of thousands of dollars each year unnecessarily. That was 5 years ago. Why didn't anybody want to touch it then? Now there's an excuse. Well, the big beautiful bill has come through and it's going to be dealing with overtime, so now we have to look at something here. And don't hold your breath. I don't think it's going to be what we would like it to be. We shall see. But here's an example about one of the advantages that they took. Say that an employee takes 2 days of holiday pay. Say he takes off Monday and Tuesday. This was an example that was given in the exec meeting by Supervisor Gutenberger. Say 2 days of holiday pay, vacation pay. So in the highway department, say that's 10-hour days. So there he's got 20 paid hours of labor that he gets paid for even though he wasn't there, or she. Well, then they come back to work Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. 10, 20, 30 more hours. What's 30 and 20? 50 hours. Well, 40 hours is a full-time work week. So the last 10 hours, 41 to 50, is overtime pay. We give them overtime pay for Friday's work day, even though they only came in 3 days that week. They get paid for hours paid, not hours worked. And that's been going on for 5 years, and administration didn't take care of it, the supervisors didn't take care of it, leadership didn't take care of it. Now they're going to use the excuse of the big beautiful bill so that the employees don't get all hot and bothered about it over that. That's the kind of thing we need help fighting. This ingrained waste of our taxpayer money. And just think of it. Those employees are basically giving the bird to us taxpayers because they're taking advantage of something they know is wrong, but is allowed. And yet, we don't appreciate them? Maybe they don't appreciate us. I go on. And we're still not looking at the main problem why we cannot balance our budget. We have too many employees for our county, and we are afraid to line it up. In the private sector, this wouldn't happen. If we had two places that would provide the services that Dodge County is providing right now, we wouldn't see this problem because they'd be working in competition with each other, but there's no competition. They're the only game in town. And we don't have enough supervisors on the board that want to realistically look at it. We need you to help us or find someone to help us. And the election is coming up. And I even haven't brought up the idea of unproductive pay. Doesn't that sound good? What would a private business do if their unproductive pay started getting higher and higher? Well, isn't it just fine to pay people not to work? I mean, that's what holiday pay is all about and vacation pay and all that. But then you have to pay someone to take their spot, so you're paying twice. I've tried to get a program in the system to print reports on non-productive pay, and somehow I always hit a brick wall. They don't want to do it. They don't want to reveal how much money we're paying people not to work, okay? And we don't appreciate our employees. Sometimes I think it's the other way around, and they just bellyache to make it seem like they're the victims. You know, this is the victim mentality kind of country we're in right now. Second point I want to make, if we're not going to touch the wages, which is really the answer to fixing our problems here rather than borrowing money to pay the employees, it doesn't matter if you find something that you can borrow money for, like roads, which you shouldn't have to borrow for. So you don't have enough money to pay the employees, but if you pay the employees, then you don't have enough money to build the roads. So what we're going to do is we're going to borrow money to build the roads and then pay the employees. Well, that might as well just say you're borrowing money to pay the employees. That's what we're doing. Every year they want to do that. And they say next year it's got to happen. I'm saying, really? Now the second thing the administration didn't want to do, they spent a whole hour again talking to the executive committee, give the administrator $2 million so he can give it away. Obviously it has to go through the executive committee to get given to something, but you can watch the executive committee. I mean, basically when he's giving his arguments for $2 million to give to other places, they're all going, yeah, I guess that sounds pretty good. You don't give away money when you have to borrow money. That should be lesson number 1 in economics. I just don't know what to do anymore. That's why I'm coming to you again. I want your help. We need your help. It worked when you called. We're not going to borrow this year, but we still have the battle in front of us. So even though we are short of revenue, we're still going to help cities and towns build housing, probably low income, no high income housing, that's for sure. And we'll have to increase our police presence, and there's other things that are going to happen, and we won't get property tax revenue for 20 or more years. That sounds like a real quick payback if you ask me, right? So, on top of all this, if it hasn't gotten good enough already, over $10 million in the general fund, unassigned, and it's called the county's savings account. And this was precious. This was really, what would be the word? I don't know. When you hear it, one of the supervisors said, "Well, it's good business sense to have lots of money in savings and borrow money." And it's like, huh? Well, if you have money in the savings, you're probably getting 5% interest. But if you borrow, you only have to pay maybe 3% interest because you have that money in the savings. So you're making money, borrowing money. You're going to borrow yourself into prosperity. The more you borrow, the more money you make, right? And obviously, everybody knows that is the most ridiculous thing. And I think when that was mentioned, everybody said, no, we're not going to go there because that's but that individual said, you get on top that way. Okay, that's just what we want to do. Tax the citizens more so we can have a bigger savings account so that we can have a better interest rate to borrow more money and make it on the interest. That's not what we're about here at the county. We're supposed to just tax for our services, payment for expenses, And we go on. Okay, we mentioned that. So the truth is, the state has incentivized borrowing money for municipalities. There's no getting around that. The argument is typically strong. You're better off borrowing. You're better off borrowing. But someday that's not going to work. I'm in a school district now that has $0 borrowed for anything, and that is the strongest position you can be in. Even though they try to incentivize borrowing, it's the strongest position to be in. Now, can we figure out a way not to fall prey to these devices? Not if you're on the board or on the committee and you just shake your head, yep, that sounds good to me. You have to start thinking. Critical thinking. Common sense, private sector thinking is what we need. But we need your help. Run for supervisor in 2026, especially if you're in the private sector as an employee or a business owner. Please come on and run. Just, well, let's look at the executive committee with this private sector, public sector balance. There's 7 people on the executive committee. 4 are public sector past or present employees. 2 are successful private sector business individuals, and 1 is an unsuccessful private sector individual. And sometimes that's the way it goes. You can't always win, but if you mess up, you start over again. That's what you do in the private sector. In the public sector, when you mess up, you just tax more. See how easy that is? So we need more private sector experience on the board, private sector employees and business owners. They know the reality of being off the public dole. Otherwise, we're going to have a future of borrowing to balance the budget, especially when they want to build this big, new, beautiful building. We heard about the big, new, beautiful build. This big, new, beautiful building isn't going to be that great. But mark my words, it's going to be coming. Millions and millions of dollars. So call your supervisor. No borrowing. Cut employee numbers. Stop giving away our money when we have to borrow money to balance the budget. Become more fiscally responsible. Sign up to help us here. Run for supervisor in 2026. Sign up by the end of December. And that's the budget meeting will be Wednesday of next week. I think it's the 12th. It's a daytime meeting. So call every supervisor and tell them here's what you want them to do next Wednesday during the day at 9 o'clock. So thanks for watching. We'll keep in touch. Bye.